Now, we're incredibly privileged to have as our next speaker the most accomplished serial entrepreneur in Britain, a man for whom the opportunities of this planet are just not quite enough. Please could we welcome the founder of the Virgin Group with around 100 companies, about 60,000 employees, Sir Richard Branson.
Yes.
The exploration of space will go ahead, and it is one of the great adventures of all time. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory on Mount Everest was asked why did he want to climb it. He said because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Virgin Galactic is on track to become the world's first commercial space line. And if you've ever dreamt of joining the incredible group of pioneering astronauts, your opportunity has arrived. During your adventure, you will accelerate to a breathtaking 3.5 times the speed of sound. Then, in the silent tranquility of space, you will experience weightlessness and views of our beautiful planet that will change your perception of life.
One of my passions or reason for wanting to fly in space is based on what these guys that do it say. And they talk about it for the rest of their lives, about wow, that was life-changing.
The rocket motor ride is a minute and a half or so, and it's exhilarating. It's like nothing else you've ever done. When that motor does shut down, you get this instant calm of weightlessness. And everything you feel in your body is the same way. It's wow.
Our first Virgin Galactic astronauts are booking their own place in history as pioneers of a new space age, and for them, the journey has already started. I've had some incredible adventures in my lifetime, and space is sure to be the greatest one of all. I am going, and I hope you will be joining me.
Now, Richard, you like a challenge, don't you? The fastest ever Atlantic balloon crossing, kite surfing across the channel. But this is a big challenge. What's the driving force? What made you want to take on something that a lot of rational business people would have said is too high risk?
I suppose, you know, as you get older in life, and you realize that that more and more is possible, and by just getting out there and trying things, generally speaking, most things are achievable, so I mean, in 1991, I got fed up waiting to have a chance to go to space on an American spaceship or a Russian spaceship at a reasonable price, and headed off, around the world to try to find an engineer or technician who could, who could build a spaceship, and fortunately came across Burt Rutar and basically invested in his genius, and now we have 400 of the greatest sort of scientists and engineers working on the program. And I mean, originally the idea was getting people into space, which is exciting enough. And I think next year we'll take more people into space than have been into space in the last 50 years. From Russian, Chinese, or American spaceships. But suddenly there's a whole mass of new doors opened up. So, I mean, our mothership, which is all carbon fiber aeroplane, it's capable of putting satellites into space at an incredibly quick speed. So in a month we can put between two motherships we can put 3,500 satellites into space. In 4 months we can actually have an array of round about 16,000 new satellites in space. We can replace satellites as and when they drop out of space within 24 hours. And if you sort of, those people who know that world, if you sit back and think the possibilities of, we can put more satellites in space in 4 months than there are currently satellites in space. What that can achieve in telephony, in internet access, in Wi-Fi access, in reaching the 2 billion people who don't have phones, to measuring global issues on global warming and so on, to monitoring illegal fishing ships, to et cetera, is enormous. So I think that out of one idea, I think it is spawning a whole lot of other very exciting ideas.
And this idea that, well, nothing is really impossible, it's not a typically European idea. The people who want to go to Mars are Californians, like Elon Musk. Google has a job title, the captain of moonshots. How did you get that confidence to say, I'm not going to be limited by other people's expectations?
Well, I think the exciting thing is that, when I was young, the idea of being an entrepreneur was, in fact, there was myself and Anita Roddick, who were interviewed for years and years and years in Europe as the two entrepreneurs. But now, entrepreneurism is an acceptable word. I mean, it's by most members of the public, and it's encouraged and it's welcomed, and there are just so many exciting young entrepreneurs in Britain and in Europe, trying to overcome all sorts of problems. And I think, as David said earlier, prizes, I think, are fantastic ways of incentivizing entrepreneurs. I'm involved in overseeing a number of different prizes: an Abu Dhabi prize, a Dutch Clean Energy prize, the X Prize, that was set up. You wouldn't have been watching that video if it hadn't been for the X Prize. I mean, they set up a prize for $10 million to see if anybody could come up with a way of getting a spaceship up into space, 3 times over 2 weeks. And obviously it wasn't going to cover the cost of doing it, but just the very fact that there was a prize there got engineers thinking. We've put up a $25 million prize to try to resolve the problems of global warming. I mean, the Virgin Earth Prize, and 10,000 engineers and scientists are participating in that. And I mean, if we can find a way of extracting carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere, we can then effectively regulate the Earth's temperature. And the billions that we're going to be spending in trying to deal with global warming, can be spent on something else. And so, if it hasn't happened yet. I mean, it took, with the Longitude Prize, it took 70 years for someone to win it. I mean, obviously, we hope that somebody can win the Earth Prize, quicker than in 70 years. But I mean, if it can be won, it would be an exciting breakthrough.
So these grand challenges, as you say, get smart people thinking in a certain way, they also generate a lot of R&D that wouldn't otherwise happen.
Yeah. And even if they don't achieve the purpose they set out to achieve, people can stumble across other completely different things that can be achieved. So, as I say, from trying to think about putting people into space, we've ended up spending as much energy on satellites and all the businesses that satellite technology can spawn off. So, so quite often, what the first path you embark on, as long as you keep an open mind, there will be lots of other paths that will spring from that.
So, NASA's investment led to the smartphones in our pockets. Apart from satellites, can you see any useful spin-offs coming out of the investment you're making in Galactic?
Look, I think numerous investments. I think the fact, first of all, people want to go to space. In the same way that people wanted to cross the Atlantic in the 1920s, and it was very expensive to do. 50 years later, millions of people were flying. If I ask people in this room who'd want to go to space, well, who would like to go to space? If we can give them a return ticket. Mother-in-laws were willing to negotiate. Anyway, if we can offer a return, if it can be affordable for them, nine out of 10 people would love to go to space. So it's up to the likes of Virgin to get the price down to a level where most people one day will have a chance to become astronauts, go into space. But then, apart from satellites, there's point-to-point air travel, and why should Concorde have once existed and disappeared, and technology, gone backwards so dramatically as far as point to point. So the 500 engineers that are working on our program are itching to say, now we've ticked the space program out of, let's start working on point to point air travel and try to make sure it's many times quicker than Concorde, make sure that it's out of the Earth's atmosphere, so we're not going to have America using sound booms as an excuse to stop us flying across the States because it wasn't invented here. Anyway, another story. And make that a reality. And I think I'm hoping in my lifetime to see that too becoming a reality.
What year will it be a 2-hour flight from London to Australia, do you think?
It will happen, and it'll definitely happen in my children's lifetime. Hopefully it'll happen in our lifetimes. And I think many years ago we flew a plane around the world, which we built on purpose as an all carbon fibre plane, which Steve Fossett flew. The Virgin Global Flyer, and the reason that we built that plane was we were so frustrated that Boeing and Airbus were not building planes out of carbon fibre, and we wanted to show them it could be done. And I'm delighted to say that today Airbus are launching a new plane which is principally all carbon fibre, and obviously Boeing's got the 787, which is largely carbon fibre, and obviously the planes that we put into space will be 100% carbon fibre, which reduces the fuel burn dramatically, and the weight of the plane dramatically.
So you recently had a very successful supersonic flight, the first commercial supersonic flight since Concorde, I think. Where are you on your schedule, and when do we expect the news to be dominated by the first passengers going up on Virgin Galactic?
Well, I'd be very disappointed if it's not this December, which is what we're aiming for, and we're on track to accomplishing. it's not completely in our hands because obviously, you've got licensing regimes and the like to go through. But I mean, I think that the technology will be safe and ready to get going by December.
So you meet a lot of entrepreneurs, you work with them, you invest in them, you employ them. What in your mind makes somebody a really disruptive entrepreneur, somebody who's going to take on these moonshots? What personality traits do you look for?
Well, I don't think that I'll be looking for them, because if they're true entrepreneurs, they won't need me. They'll be just getting on and doing it themselves. But an entrepreneur is simply somebody who has a great idea that's going to make a radical difference to other people's lives, and then just gets on and does it. And that's simply what it is. We can come up with ideas which will get, which will helpfully create entrepreneurs. I mean, for instance, we've said that the profits that we make from our airline industry, we want people to come up with ideas to turn dirty fuels into clean fuels, and when we want to be able to power our planes on fuels that don't emit carbon. And there are entrepreneurs all over the world trying to come up with aviation fuel that doesn't emit any carbon. There's a brilliant British entrepreneur who lives in New Zealand who's come up with, he has a tiny little company called Lancetech, and he experimented in New Zealand at a steel plant. He saw all this rubbish going up the chimney, and he thought, that rubbish is full of good stuff. And he built a tiny little plant next to the steel plant, and out of this plant came with a lot of work, jet aviation fuel, and now he's replicating that by building big plants in Shanghai and in other big Chinese cities. And Virgin Atlantic will be the first airline to use this fuel in our planes, and it's recycling at its very, very best. I mean, all that shit that was going up into the air will now be used twice as jet aviation fuel. And there are other companies we've worked in. I mean, people who are trying to to develop isobutanol as a jet fuel. People who are trying to make algae as a jet fuel. And when I say try, they've now, they've made it, and now it's trying to make enough quantity to satisfy the airline industry. So I think if you can set the challenge, with most problems are overcomeable. Perhaps the biggest challenge in the world is the clean energy challenge per se. I mean, I think there's something like 1,200 new coal-fired power stations planned at the moment. Those 1,200 coal-fired power stations alone will produce the amount of carbon that the world can safely exist in. And yet these are 1,200 new coal-fired power stations. And so, so an enormous challenge to get out there and deal with the problem of global warming. And it really does need governments to sit down with entrepreneurs and to map a way forward. And it's going to need, it's going to need both. It's going to need, governments setting, getting rid of subsidies on dirty fuels, being brave on setting carbon taxes, and then it's going to need entrepreneurs to go all out to try to deal with the problem.
So you talk a lot about things like clean energy. On your Twitter stream in the last few weeks, we've had everything from we need to decriminalise drugs. The war on drugs has failed. We need to work on ex-offenders. We need to work on food waste. We need to work on cleaning up the oceans. How far do you see the responsibility of the successful entrepreneur moving into social impact?
Well, look, I think that I've been in business for 45 years, since I was 15, and as a businessman, I see issues. I travel the world, I see issues which to me are glaringly obvious, and I think it's important that you speak out on them. I've stayed completely out of party politics, but I think it's a responsibility. I think business, can be a force for good, and they can make a difference in the world, and they shouldn't just think of themselves as, worrying about the bottom line profit. I think if we can get every single business leader in the world to adopt a problem or two, helping social workers, helping governments, we can get on top of most of the problems in the world. If you just take, the one issue that you just mentioned. If you take drugs, it was ex-politicians that asked me to join the Global Commission on Drugs about 2 years ago, and they were doing there were 16 ex-heads of state, including Kofi Annan, who used to run the United Nations and headed up by President Cardoso from Brazil, and they felt that it was important to do an in-depth study of the problem, which they did, and after 2 years of doing the study, it was glaringly obvious to all of us that the war on drugs had been a failure. It had failed for 40 or 50 years. As a businessman, if I had a business that failed for 1 year, I would close it down, and that something needed to be done about it. And it was causing enormous amounts of people to get HIV unnecessary, hepatitis C unnecessary. The prisons were full of people unnecessarily, and there needed to be a different approach. And the approach that the Commission simply said was, please treat drugs as a health problem, not a criminal problem, and let's get on top of the problem, as Portugal and Spain and Germany have done. So I think that business leaders need to speak out on issues that they feel strongly about.
Got time for one quick question from the room. There are microphones roving around. Whoever's first to put their hand up will get that question to Richard Branson. Just over here. And it has to be a question with a question mark, because we don't have very much time.
Hi Richard, Ben Stevenson, entrepreneur. What would you say is the current biggest problem or barrier to innovation in the UK at the moment, and how do we go about solving that?
Well, I'll end, if I may, I'll end on a positive note, actually, because the government, we spoke with the government some time ago and said, look, there's it often takes an incredibly small amount of money to get a business going. In my own case, my mum found a necklace and she handed the necklace into a policeman, and after 3 months she got the £300 from the for being able to sell the necklace, because nobody claimed it, and gave it to me, and that £300 is now employing 60,000 people, and one might laugh, but actually, literally, you can start businesses on very, very small sums of money, and the government have introduced an entrepreneurial loan scheme, which I think they're the first country in the world to do this, and so that. If you don't want to necessarily go to university, but you have a great business idea, you can apply for this entrepreneurial loan, and I just think it's absolutely terrific. And there will only be a certain percentage of people that will succeed. Some of those people will go on and employ 60,000 people one day, but in the process, they're going to learn. An enormous amount by trying and failing. Much more than they're actually able to learn studying about it. And so I'd really like to take my hats off to the government for such an innovative suggestion. They didn't quite answer your question, but thank you.
Last quick question.
What kind of business are you in?
So my first startup just failed, and I'm now. So my first startup just failed, which was an augmented reality company. Probably technology was a bit too early, and now at that point where effectively I have basically expended all my capital, and so now I'm at that point where I have to make something out of nothing. So I think that putting myself in that challenge is actually probably the most interesting and exciting place that I found myself in out of that whole process.
And to answer the question that you put to me?
What do I think it is? I think from an entrepreneur point of view, larger businesses helping smaller businesses where they might necessarily charge a greater amount of money to a more established business. So in effect, sort of helping hands through partnerships. Yeah,
a good idea. They, well, when your next idea comes up, if we can help, let me know. Send me your card as we leave.
We knew there'd be hidden rewards coming to the Innovation Summit.
Anyway, cheers.
The last quick question from me. After space, what's the next sector you'd like to disrupt?
Well, most of my time is spent on not-for-profits these days. So we launched an organisation called the B Team yesterday with a lot of incredible sort of business leaders like Paul Pullman and Mohammed Yunus and Ratan Tata and all like-minded individuals who want to do in a sense what we just touched on earlier, and that is get every single business in the world not just to think about the bottom line, but to think about the environment, think about people, use our financial strengths, use our perhaps global recognition, etc., to go out and help governments and social workers change the world. So
if anybody can do it, this man can.
We'll try.
We're about to go to a coffee break to be back here at 10:15 sharp. But in the meantime, please could we have a warm thank you to Richard Branson.